Hello everyone. Today I would like to take a look at the YouTube channel called Prophecy Watchers. This was a surprisingly deep rabbit hole for me to go down, but one that I think others may find interesting. Importantly, I think I should state that the reason I am so interested in this particular channel is because I believe they are monetarily profiting from fear-mongering. I haven't seen any videos yet addressing this channel, so I thought I would throw my hat into the ring. I'm unsure as of now if I would make this a series of videos, as the prophecies they are commonly referring to are all going to be explored in this video. So, for the sake of my own well-being and the runtime of this video, we're only going to look at two of their videos today. We'll start off with a video aptly titled Miracle Number 2.
And you know, Bob, a lot of people are talking about the blood moons. And I have here a letter from Lyle L. And he asks this question. I was wondering when you were going to do another prophecy update. We have the blood moon coming up on the 8th of October, and I have no clue what to watch for. Well, join the club, Lyle. A lot of us have no clue. And you know, the thing that makes us all watch that blood moon phenomenon is written in Joel 2:31. And mind you, this takes place prior to the tribulation, according to Joel. The sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call.
That's quite the way to start ourselves off here. I feel it prescient to relay that yes, this is indeed a Christian-influenced ministry focused on looking out for signs for biblical prophecies to be fulfilled. Apparently, blood moons are a sign for something that we don't quite know how to look out for yet. Let's see what else they have to say about these blood moons.
And in fact, those 4 blood moons take place on Passover and Sukkot, and right in the middle is a huge total solar eclipse on a Passover. Okay, you could say coincidence. I believe in coincidences. I'm not predicting anything. I don't think Mark Biltz is predicting anything, except he's asking everybody to watch. And what's wrong with that?
But, you know, the reality is these things are there. They're signs in the heavens. Did God put them there? Well, I tend to think he did. It seems to be just a little too much odds-wise to be a coincidence or an accident. What's going to happen? We're not predicting the rapture. We're not predicting the start of the tribulation. But I think God is giving us some warning signs.
Blood moons are a fairly regular occurrence, happening anywhere between 2 to 4 times every single year. We are led to believe that this should be a miraculous warning from the heavens before rapture, based on a passage from Joel 2:31, which reads, "The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come." Now, let's put on our critical analysis hats and investigate what the book of Joel is intending to say here. Knowing historical context, the most important thing we need to keep in mind is that this was a book written by an individual living in ancient Israel who may have certain biases which influence their work. When we read the book of Joel, which is thankfully rather short, it is made clear that what is being talked about is an incoming drought that spurs on a period of tribulation. As a sign for the times to come, the sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon into blood. This sounds pretty scary indeed. But as we read further into the book of Joel, the prophecy becomes much more specific. It is said that people will fall on their swords, but will be unable to die. This, of course, did not happen after the blood moon and eclipse back in 2015, when this Prophecy Watchers video was recorded. Nor did this really happen ever. However, Joel even further specifies that God will cast judgment on the kingdoms of Egypt and Edom. So, Edom no longer exists within the present day, as you may have realized. Interestingly, the kingdom of Edom is now split between modern-day Israel and modern-day Jordan. You may also be wondering when exactly Edom was dissolved. This actually happened right around the time when the book of Joel has been dated as being written, although some parts may have been written even earlier. What is important to note is that the Edomites were being pushed northward into the land of Judea and had both conquered land in Judea as well as assimilated within their territory. Joel, son of Pethuel, who we can only assume wrote the book of Joel, must have taken umbrage with this expansion by the Edomites. This is why he would write that God was going to cast judgment upon them. Of course, he did not foresee that shortly after writing the book of Joel, that the Edomites would almost fully assimilate into the Jewish population, with some sources stating this was by force, on the order of the Jewish Hasmonean dynasty, while others suggest it was by their own volition. I bring this up because we may still have people who try to state this prophecy may still be fulfilled. I did just say that the kingdom of Edom is on the border of Israel and Jordan. Wouldn't it be possible that Joel really saw the people of Jordan receiving God's wrath? I would personally say no. Remember, the Edomites assimilated with the Israelites. If this is divine prophecy, then why would a divine being make it so misleading that the recipient of this prophecy would be one specific group rather than an entirely different group of people? This was a prophetic vision given to Joel in his sleep, too. Can't we just say that while his dream may have been a real dream, he gave it far too much credibility in suggesting that it was prophetic? Today there are hundreds of people, even millions of people, who may have dreams like this or even believe that God spoke to them. Yet the majority of people in the modern era would be inclined to not take these people at their word. Why do we make an exception for people living so long ago? Looking at the prophecy in this context, I think it is a lot clearer to see it for what it is. A failed prophecy which could be really considered as a prediction instead. Bear in mind that Joel stated that the day of the Lord is near. It's really hard to imagine that by near, he meant 2,000 years later, long after one of the two kingdoms he thought would be given righteous judgment assimilated with his own people. We could say that Joel was actually talking about Judgment Day, but I think that is giving far too much credence to the text. This is, quite plainly, just ancient writings of someone who disliked the kingdoms of Edom and Egypt. So, why do we think blood moons were prophesied as a warning sign back then? The simple answer would be that although these astronomical events happen multiple times every year, people living in the Bronze Age didn't have access to the wealth of information we have in the present day. I think it would be rather shocking to not see people speculating as to what blood moons could mean. While they happen often, they are also infrequent enough to be read as omens. Likewise, we also know that eclipses are incredibly common. While most are partial eclipses, we have a total solar eclipse once every 18 months. What changes with these eclipses is that they are highly localized events, meaning that only a small section of the planet will even be able to see them when they happen. That's why here in the United States, we have a 7-year gap between solar eclipses, which we could see. After 2024, it will be a much longer wait of 20 years until a solar eclipse can be seen in 2044 from within the United States. With astronomical occurrences like these happening so frequently, it comes as a surprise that a divine being would use them to warn people of oncoming doom, especially in a modern context when we have a firm understanding of these phenomena. Wouldn't it be much better to use something like Halley's Comet? While still a regular occurrence, it is one that most people would be lucky to even have the chance to experience twice. If we are meant to look for the stars for signs of our impending doom, it is rather disappointing that we basically have to keep our fingers crossed literally every single year. This is yet another reason why I think we shouldn't leave too much credence to this prophecy. Back when it was written, this may have been seen as far more miraculous as compared to today, which is why someone would use it and try to rally support from others about an approaching apocalypse. Otherwise, we have to look at it like this. There have been over 2,200 different times minimum that this prophecy could have been fulfilled, but it hasn't. So, what is going to be so special about the next 2,200? This is such a vast amount of time that we may as well forget about it even if it were true, which it certainly is not. The prophecy watchers, however, do not really seem to care about the historical context of when this prophecy was written. Instead, they simply request that we watch, as there is nothing wrong with that. Yes, I suppose there is nothing wrong with telling people how a blood moon is a warning sign for a great and horrible tribulation, while pointing out we have a blood moon coming up. While Gary Stearman doesn't say he is predicting anything, this is still priming people to be concerned and looking for signs where there really shouldn't be any, especially when we critically examine the quoted passage from the Bible and examine its historical context. Perhaps we will get a better example of a prophecy to look out for in the next video, though. This one's a bit more of a doozy, so please give me your time when we take a look.
Hello again, Gary Stearman. Welcome to another edition of Prophecy Watchers. With me, author, lecturer, and biblical thinker, L.A. Marzulli. Always on the cutting edge. L.A., thanks for coming by.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Gary.
L.A. Marzulli, well, let me just start by saying I've got 8 DVDs here, Watchers 1 through 8. A lot of you are familiar with those. I have 7 DVDs here. And let me just, L.A., start by reading the titles on some of these. This one is UFO Disclosure, the Alien Gospel, a field a manual to spiritual warfare, the alien abduction phenomenon, signs of the end times, Alien Agenda 1, Alien Agenda 2, prophecies being fulfilled in our lifetime. You know, a lot of people take the view, L.A., that we're not seeing prophecy being fulfilled in our day.
The beginning of this video, the supernatural and the alien gospel, is running into a common problem with a lot of people who try to use the Bible and its prophecies as signs for the end times. Many of these prophecies, such as the one we examined earlier from the book of Joel, were meant to be fulfilled back when they were written. The grand majority of these prophecies have a dire sense of urgency to them. God is going to come fulfill this prophecy any day now. Many of these prophecy watchers, so to speak, will count the hits and insist the misses are yet to come, rarely ever admitting that a prophecy had failed. When prophecy tells us to look out for wars and rumors of wars, along with natural disasters, I think it pertinent for us to always keep in mind how frequent these things are. We all should know by this point, being in the information age, that these things happen all of the time. If you were to ask a historian if there was ever a time of world peace, they would almost certainly either tell you no outright or say that there were periods of relative peace, such as the era of Pax Romana back in the 1st century. I doubt many people would say this was an entirely peaceful period, though, given the fact that, this is also the exact same time frame where Jesus would have been crucified.
Let me add to that, because there are some today who would say, if you look for signs in the heavens, you're doing something that's really not condoned. It's not quite legal to look for signs in the heavens because you might misinterpret what you see. And that would include the sun, moon, stars, and, may I say, mysterious lights that appear and disappear.
I think what Gary Stearman is getting at here is that it's ridiculous to believe in these things, as we have previously established. L.A. Marzulli elaborates, though, on what he means by an alien gospel, specifically bringing up a conversation from the infamous documentary No Intelligence Allowed by Ben Stein, where he speaks with Richard Dawkins.
Is there an alien gospel?
Oh, there is, and we see it promulgated by people like Richard Dawkins, one of the premier evolutionists of the 20th, 21st century. He sits down with Ben Stein in what I would now consider a classic film, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. Stein asks Dawkins, where did this first self-replicating molecule come from? Dawkins fidgets in his chair and says, well, no one really knows. And Stein throws him an intellectual life on, well, how could it have happened? And Dawkins then promulgates and espouses what I would come to call the coming great deception, or the alien gospel. And he basically says the summation of it is this: that millions of years ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a group of extraterrestrials who had to arrive at a very high level of civilization by some sort of Darwinian process created life and then seeded us through the galaxies, and presto chango, here we are on Earth.
Well, why don't we just verify what exactly was said between Dawkins and Stein? Hello, everyone. This is me coming partway through the editing process. This part of the video has been copyright struck multiple times by the Discovery Institute, so instead, I am just going to dub over the scene. If you want to see the original, it is available on YouTube. For the purposes of this video, though, have fun with my impersonations. How did it get created? By a very slow process. Well, how did it start? Nobody knows how it got started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life. And what was that? It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. Right, and how did that happen? I told you, we don't know. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in Darwinian evolution? Well, it could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved, probably by some kind of Darwinian means, probably to a very high level of technology, and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now that is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility, and I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer. And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point. Okay, so it's quite clear that this is only a hypothetical being posed by Dawkins. He deliberately states that he doesn't yet know how life on Earth originated, but suggests that even if it were from intelligent design, then it would have been likely it was from the intervention of other intelligent beings and not necessarily a god. He would believe evidence for such an event would be in our genetic code, but does not affirm that such evidence exists, for the time being. He doesn't actually believe in this explanation. Anyway, let's see what L.A. Marzulli has to say about this.
Panspermia.
Panspermia. And this is what he believes. And this is what the movies and Prometheus Entertainment, with all due respect, on the History Channel, the Ancient Aliens series, now in its 7th season. I was on the first 2 seasons, and this is one of the reasons why we started to watch this series, because we couldn't really get our story told. They have an agenda, and it's the ancient astronaut theorist. This all hinges on the Darwinian paradigm, and Christians need to understand what's at stake here. That everything hinges on the Darwinian paradigm. If there is no God, then how did we get here? That Darwinism creates this intellectual and spiritual vacuum in people. And that's why the movie Prometheus several years ago, this rich industrialist goes out in space to find his creator. That's what he's looking for. Well, we know who our creator is. All we need to do is read the Gospel of John.
Okay, so let's be generous here. Marzulli is likely saying that Dawkins merely believes that if intelligent design is how we got here, then it would probably be aliens rather than God, although it seems as though he is implying Dawkins truly believes in ancient aliens. He may just be accidentally lumping him in with the filmmakers behind Prometheus and the History Channel's Ancient Aliens crew. Marzulli simply disagrees with the conclusion that aliens are a better explanation for intelligent design, likely due to his belief in the Bible, but let's hear him out.
All things were made by him. It's talking about Jesus. And without him, nothing that was made was made. So we know the source of creation. And, people, that's a silly story. It's mythos. Well, but what about the mythos of Dawkins, who says millions of years ago in a galaxy far, far away, a race? He's just making this stuff up. And he doesn't know.
he's tacitly admitting that there are aliens traveling around out there,
Sure.
and they are seeding the galaxy with their seed.
This is now where we must draw one of two conclusions. Either Stearman and Marzulli are being dishonest here, or they are plainly mistaken on what Dawkins' point really was. Again, he offered up the idea of aliens seeding life on our planet as a candidate explanation for intelligent design. If we rewind the tape again, we can see that his actual answer to the question of where the first self-replicating cells came from was, I don't know. If you pressed me to give a possible explanation for intelligent intervention in this way, I too would likely offer up aliens before God. That is, of course, based on the presumption that we're even saying an intelligent being had anything to do with it. Of course, if I was fielded the question of where the first self-replicating cell came from, I would also say that I don't know. However, I would add that the field of chemistry currently studying abiogenesis is the best explanation that we have, and is likely where we will find our answer to this question. Many of the necessary cells for life, such as amino acids and proteins, can be synthesized with inorganic materials when activated by external forces like lightning or radiation. We simply just do not currently have a model to suggest how RNA could have originated. Dawkins may have known this at the time of his conversation with Ben Stein, but did not want to stake himself on this, since it is still a field of study that is in its infancy. If you would like to learn more about abiogenesis, I will say that I am not exactly qualified to give a comprehensive lesson on it. Professor Dave, on the other hand, is. I highly recommend his channel and his debate with James Tour on abiogenesis. Getting back on track with Marzulli's argument, he states that while God can be claimed as a myth, so could the suggestion of alien interference with humanity. To this extent, I fully agree with him. Evidence for aliens, especially ancient aliens, is as tenuous as the evidence for any God claim. Both could be considered myth. If we're to take this conclusion, then, I don't see why either of these explanations should be taken any more seriously than saying, I don't know. Seeing as no argument is made in this particular video, though, we'll simply just gloss over the issue for now and see what else Marzulli has to say.
We have the answers because we have the Bible, and we believe that it's the Word of God. And why would Jesus warn us that men would faint from fear from what is coming upon the earth? What could that possibly mean? It's coming upon the earth from outside the Earth's atmosphere. Could it be a UFO? Could it be a mile-wide mothership? Could it be a comet? Could it be a huge solar flare? What is it? Why would Jesus warn us that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible?
Yeah.
Why would he, and all the things he could, why not just tell us, and in the end days your mortgages will be paid and everyone will drive the car of their dreams? That's not what he says. He says the elect would be deceived if that were possible. And then Paul, and you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum, Paul tag teams onto that and basically says, look, Satan, the fallen cherub, is going to come with all signs and lying wonders. When we put those in a cosmic blender and mix them all up, guess what? Welcome to 2014 going into 2015.
And Satan, we're here, just happens to be the prince of the power of the air, which means that all those weird things you see floating around up there in the air that people talk about now, and they're being reported in the hundreds as we speak.
Actually, the thousands.
You're right.
Yeah. That's right. UFO sightings are actually Satan and his army coming to Earth to deceive us. I think, for obvious reasons, this is a little bit silly. There are many instances throughout history where people observed what was, to them, inexplicable things happening in the night sky. UFO sightings in particular are a fairly recent phenomena, though. We're running into a problem again. The problem being that we are presupposing that we know why these things are happening. To suggest that Satan is an explanation for UFO sightings, we first need to prove that Satan exists. If we cannot, then this suggestion is no different than someone saying UFOs are caused by unicorns. Recently, a new government office has been created titled All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which investigates footage of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. You can visit their website and view declassified recordings and see brief explanations of what they had recorded. I think it worth mentioning that ever since the invention of flight, specifically commercial flight, the number of UAP or UFO sightings substantially increased. As technology advances, we also introduce even more aerial crafts into our space. Drones, for example, are quite common in the 2020s. I don't think it is unreasonable to believe that many unidentified or inexplicable phenomena observed in the sky could likely be attributed to these factors. Is this going to be the actual explanation for all of these sightings? Of course not. However, it is more reasonable to first believe in such explanations until there is enough evidence to suggest any given UAP was not a commercial aircraft, a satellite, a drone, someone's private aircraft, or even a government aircraft. These are all demonstrably real explanations and, as such, are candidate explanations for what people are seeing. In order to believe in other explanations, we first need to have sufficient evidence which is concordant with the claim. So, what about Satan? First, as an exercise, I would like for anyone watching this video to pause for a moment so that you can look up in the Bible when Satan was cast out from heaven. If you're returning from your search, you may be just as surprised that I was that this isn't well recorded in the Bible. Rather, Jesus says in the book of Luke that he saw Satan fall from heaven, and the book of Isaiah refers to a king named Lucifer, who was not Satan, who fell from power. However, the book of Revelation has the only occurrence where Satan, depicted as a dragon, is cast out from heaven, a book which was written in the 1st century after the death of Jesus. What else is interesting about this passage is how this so-called devil was only meant to be chained in hell for 1,000 years. So if we're to take this book at face value and try to remedy it with the Bible, then this dragon had to have been cast out from heaven sometime prior to Jesus' arrival on earth, because he stated that he was a witness to when this happened. But we also have to keep in mind that whenever this dragon was cast out from heaven, it was only meant to be locked away for 1,000 years. Jesus, in the New Testament, repeatedly states that the oncoming apocalypse would happen soon, even providing the deadline of within the lifetimes of the disciples. So could that perhaps suggest that the devil was cast out from heaven in approximately 1000 BCE? This is where we run into yet another problem with this prophecy. The 2,000-year period going back 1,000 years prior to Jesus' birth and 1,000 years after his death does not see us experiencing the apocalypse depicted in the book of Revelation. In other words, this is a failed prophecy. It is also the only instance in which we actually get anything close to a depiction of Satan being cast from heaven. Usually, I like to look at the surrounding text to provide further context, but we're going to be addressing the book of Revelation again later. For now, I just want to remind everyone that Jesus deliberately stated he saw Satan fall from heaven, and outside of the book of Revelation, that is the only place where we hear of such a story. You may notice that Satan actually appears a few other times in the Bible, though, and he's actually an agent of God and still in heaven, such as in the books of Job and Numbers. So if we're to take an account of Satan falling from heaven, remember that it had to have been before Jesus was alive on earth. I bring this up because we have contradicting accounts of who Satan is and what he is prophesied to do. Christianity, as a religion, is apocalyptic. It is meant to end with an apocalypse, but it can't ever seem to get the specifics of it correct. Whenever we are provided with a deadline, I think we should take it at its word. It comes off as dishonest to me to insist that the span of time is different in heaven, so a day to God may be more like a year for humans, and a year more like a century or even millennia. If we are supposed to look at this book as divinely inspired, it is a massive leap to also suggest that it was made inaccurate in spite of its divine influence. God, of all people, should know how to translate the span of a day, a year, or even 1,000 years from his perspective to a human perspective to give us an accurate, approximate time for when to expect his prophecies to come true. Otherwise, why provide dates, deadlines, or even a prophecy to begin with? All he is doing is setting himself up for failure. I have a feeling that prophecy watchers don't really care about this detail. After all, the Bible also says that no one will truly know when Judgment Day will happen. But can't we all take a minute to consider that this is just an excuse? If any apocalyptic preacher came about in today's age saying they were the son of the god Zoroaster and that Judgment Day would be coming soon, but they can't exactly be sure of how soon, wouldn't we all simply dismiss this individual? Why are we giving credibility to nearly the exact same scenario that happened 2,000 years ago that also has less evidence than similar claims made today, especially when given deadlines that were not met?
And the church needs to wake up and get off the anti-supernatural bandwagon and begin to look at some of these things. Remember, we're the people that believe in the virgin birth, talking donkeys, floating axe heads,
Indeed.
2 gold coins that appear out of fish's mouth, staff which turns into serpents, rocks that gush water that can quench the thirst of millions of people in the
We believe
desert.
in miracles.
We believe in miracles.
I feel as though this section of the video properly explains itself. There is quite literally no evidence that any of these things Marzulli listed even happened, let alone could happen. If pressed to explain, I am certain that the explanation for these occurrences would be that God can do anything, so anything inexplicable is easily hand-waved away as a miracle performed by God. This same criteria doesn't tend to be applied toward other extraordinary claims, though. It was even demonstrated earlier in this same video where the hypothetical proposed by Richard Dawkins was dismissed. I am curious to know what Marzulli would say about abiogenesis as a potential explanation for how life first came about on Earth from non-life. I can certainly say that there is stronger evidence to suggest this is an explanation as opposed to the biblical account, while also acknowledging that it currently is not strong enough to be definitively considered as the explanation. How exactly would he refute such a claim if not relying upon faith rather than evidence?
People, pilots, radar. I mean, a modicum of research will show, and this is what further evidence in our Watches series is about, all this stuff. It's not pie in the sky. We actually have real physical, evidence and film and all this other, hardcore scientific data that shows something is happening. You get a mile-wide craft showing up, all bets are off.
In 2007, a pilot named Ray Bauer, along with at least 2 witnesses, saw a bright, freestanding disk in the English Channel that resembled sunlight, but didn't hurt their eyes when they looked directly at it. Bauer described the disk as being approximately a mile wide. This is the most attested to claim I was able to find of such a UFO. While there are other claims, they are individual accounts without any evidence aside from the individual claiming they saw a UFO, which they believed to be a mile wide or larger. This particular incident from 2007 is unique, as it has 2 witnesses who are with Ray Bauer who confirm seeing the same object, as well as regional airline pilot Patrick Patterson. There are offered explanations for what was seen, namely the phenomena known as sun dogs. However, it should be noted that the air traffic controller officer who was communicating at the time with Bauer, Paul Kelly, confirmed that he saw a blip on the radar that may have been what Bauer was seeing, but he did suspect it to be meteorological in nature. I won't deny that these people saw something, but to draw the conclusion that this was an alien spacecraft is a hasty conclusion, I feel. We may not be comfortable with accepting the sundog explanation because of Kelly confirming he found something on his radar. We also could say that his radar picked up a meteorological event as he reasoned, and it coincidentally lined up with several people seeing sundogs. No matter what, I would say that this incident is inconclusive at best, or a coincidence at worst. I would not say that aliens are a proper explanation, as there isn't sufficient evidence to warrant such a conclusion.
Unless a person knows what they're looking at a priori before the event happens, they can so easily be deceived. And that calls back, in my mind, the words of Jesus, who tells us, warns us, that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible.
I find it rather interesting that Marzulli is willing to accept scientific evidence, but will only take such evidence so far. The moment scientific evidence would tell us certain events in the Bible didn't happen or couldn't happen, I would believe he would object to science. Similarly, science can show us hard evidence for UAPs, but he won't accept scientific explanations for what some of these UAPs are. I won't deny that there are certainly recordings of UAPs which we are not being shown. However, I think it more reasonable to believe that it is because they are currently still under investigation or depict spacecraft being utilized by one of our world governments which has not yet been disclosed to the general public. We know of black sites and government projects that are classified, but I don't think it is reasonable to presume these have anything to do with religion for the time being. Again, we require evidence for such claims.
So what is coming is unprecedented.
Yes.
And remember, Paul says that God sends them strong delusion because they did not believe the truth. And the truth goes back to the earlier statement in the Gospel of John. All things were made by him. And what is the prevailing paradigm on a global level? Darwinism. So that the world has turned away from the truth being that he, the Most High God, created everything through his Son, Yeshua, Jesus. We've turned our back, not we, but collectively, humankind has turned their back, embraced the Darwinian paradigm. Guess what? God is going to give us what we want. Okay, fine. Here comes the strong delusion, which will be crafted by the fallen one, which will
Then
turn everything
up and
upside
say,
down.
"We are your creators."
That's right.
Wow.
Evolution is evidently how life has reached its current state. I would say there is little to no evidence at all to suggest that we are divinely created in the first place. And as mentioned before, the field of abiogenesis has offered a candidate explanation for how life first arose without the need of supernatural interference. My question here for L.A. Marzulli would be whether or not he thinks reality is a delusion. He seems to prefer to cherry-pick evidence whenever possible and draw unreasonable conclusions based on said evidence. Meanwhile, evolution, which is perhaps one of the most scientifically sound fields of study we have in the present day, is one that he denies the evidence of, simply because the Bible told him that God created us. What evidence do we have to suggest this account is true? Well, the jury is still out on that one. As for the veracity of evolution, I will refer anyone interested in the subject to the YouTube channels of Forrest Valkai, Professor Dave, Gutsick Gibbon, and Aaron Ra. All of them thoroughly explain evolution in terms which the general public can easily understand and are excellent introductory resources for further study into the field of evolutionary biology.
And of course, that false god, it will be the one who stands behind the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
And we find that in Daniel, when Daniel describes the rise of the willful king, the man of sin.
Sure.
We find it in Revelation. And so there has to be a power behind the throne when the Antichrist rises, and you see that being laid out right now.
I do. I really do.
This is, perhaps, the most favored prophecy that conspiratorial Christians like to use when trying to apply prophecies from thousands of years ago to the modern age. The book of Daniel does not actually say the word Antichrist at all. Instead, if we go to Daniel 11:36 through 45, which is interpreted by some to be referring to the Antichrist, we see that it is referring to a king of the north who is defying God and trying to conquer the lands of the south. Well, let's consider when the book of Daniel was written for a moment to see if we can draw a conclusion as to who this king is. Dating methods would place this book as being written around the time of 170 BCE. So, who could this king of the north be? I think it is readily apparent that it would be the king of the Grecian Seleucid Empire, most likely Antiochus IV, the very same king who persecuted the Jews of Judea from 167 BCE which continued on to 160 BCE, leading to the Maccabean Revolt and the Hanukkah story. Whoever wrote the book of Daniel wanted to make it seem as though the downfall of King Antiochus IV was prophesied, so wrote the book as if it had been from 400 years in the past. Many predictions were made about past events, which of course turned out to be true because, again, these events were in the past. It's quite hard to get them wrong when you know what happened. Daniel then writes about the struggles against the Seleucid Empire and specifically prophesies the failure of King Antiochus as a way to bring hope to the revolting Jews. He was, of course, correct, as the Jews succeeded in their revolt. I think it is rather obvious this is what the book of Daniel is talking about, as that is essentially what the rest of the book is building up to, the experience of Daniel and his fellow Jews struggling against the Seleucid Empire. Daniel 12, however, tells of a prophecy about the end times. The problem here is that it is implied to be relatively shortly after the death of King Antiochus IV, a death which happened in the year of 164 BCE, and was immediately followed by not the end of the world. It is, yet again, a failed prophecy. It attempts to give itself more credence, however, by having the man in linen, who was delivering this message to Daniel, tell him that no one really knows when this is going to happen. So, although it is implied and even directly told to Daniel that this would happen right after King Antiochus's death, there's enough leeway to suggest it would happen later. This is why some Christians don't like looking at the obvious interpretation of the book of Daniel. They like to think that maybe what he saw was some other king of the north who would try to conquer the lands of the south. The book was just vague enough to be taken as meaning something other than what it obviously was supposed to mean. As far as anyone in the modern era should be concerned, though, I think this interpretation is willingly ignoring the historical context of when this book was written and trying to retrofit it to a modern time, especially considering that the King of the North wasn't even meant to be the Antichrist. So, where do we get an Antichrist from? The first reference we have outside of Paul's writings can be found in 1 John chapter 2. Here, Jesus is quoted as stating that there would be several antichrists. We even get a definition, where it is stated that whoever so denies the Father and the Son, meaning God and Jesus, is an antichrist. Then, in 1 John chapter 4, verse 3, as well as in 2 John chapter 1, verse 7, we get clarification that anyone who denies Jesus had returned in the flesh is also an antichrist too. This is rather interesting, as it would imply that Paul is an antichrist. And that's really it. Any other references to an antichrist are reading into the Bible and putting one in there. Now, based on the definitions provided to us by the Bible itself, we can actually state that the majority of characters depicted within the Bible are antichrists. But what Prophecy Watchers is talking about is one particular antichrist. If we return to the book of Revelation and go to chapter 13, we are introduced to a beast, who many interpret as being the Antichrist. Now, we have to assume this beast is symbolic because its description is that of an actual beast and not a man. So, this beast, who we'll call the Antichrist for now, comes from the sea and starts killing many saints, implied to even be saints sent from heaven. If we turn back to earlier on in the book of Revelation, we see that the angels from heaven had come to save only 144,000 virgin Israelite men and let everyone else suffer before they eventually start to kill. These 144,000 being 12,000 members of the 12 tribes of Israel. This Antichrist then arrives and would stop angels from killing the rest of us. The Antichrist is wounded, but is miraculously healed before a second beast arrives, raining fire down from the sky. This second beast then commands everyone to worship the Antichrist, despite the book of Revelation already stating that everyone was going to worship the Antichrist. The Antichrist then has everyone take the number 666 and puts it either on their forehead or their right hand, and this allows them to trade resources for a while. Then Jesus comes down on a cloud with a sickle and kills approximately 24 trillion people, if we're to do the math on how much blood the Bible says he spills. God then has 7 angels pour vials of his wrath onto the survivors, each vial making them suffer horrendously, which, of course, causes them to blaspheme against God. Then we are told that there are 10 kings who fornicated with the same woman, which I do believe is clearly meant to be a metaphor, and we're directly told that these kings also sided with the Antichrist. It wasn't their own decision, though. It is made quite clear that God had actually altered them to guarantee that they would side with the Antichrist. The woman who the 10 kings fornicated with is then killed by God, and all the kings mourn her death. Jesus then returns once more to bring the kingdom of God to earth, casting away the beast and the Antichrist into a lake of fire and brimstone before he kills any remaining survivors. This is when we once more reach the passage about Satan being cast out from heaven to a bottomless pit, where he reemerges after 1,000 years, only to be cast into the same lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and Antichrist are. That's right, we're touching on this again. See, some Christians will still use this passage to prove Satan fell from heaven, but it would be wrong to do so. The chronology has this happening during the end of the world. I think we all remember that Jesus also said that Satan fell from heaven earlier, and that he was there to witness it. So when did that happen? The book of Revelation has it happening long after Jesus was on earth, and there's no other depiction of this in the Bible. So our question will just unfortunately remain unanswered. We do not know why or when Satan was cast from heaven. In other words, it is an extra-biblical account, and is said to have been witnessed by Jesus. Going back to the story of death and destruction, God will then judge everyone based on their works, including having faith, and if deemed unworthy, they, too, will be cast into a lake of fire and brimstone, where they receive their second death. Then the new kingdom of God will be in Jerusalem, and the author of the book makes sure to really get the point across that you have to believe in everything in the book of Revelation. If you don't, you get included with the people being cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. He also then states that if you change anything from the book when copying it, you get sent to the lake. If you don't include everything from the book, you go to the lake. This is, in essence, what Judgment Day is supposed to be. I don't think a lot of people have read this part of the Bible, and I don't think they really take this seriously. If they did, they would realize that literally less than 1% of all people ever are actually going to get to enjoy the kingdom of heaven on earth. Yet, many still accept the idea that this apocalypse is coming. I find it a bit disingenuous not to take the majority of this prophecy at its word, if we're going to lend it any credence at all. The problem with doing so is that it really paints God in a massively negative light. Even if we were to interpret the imagery depicted in the book of Revelation, which I do believe is the intent of the book, we still have to acknowledge that it provides fairly definitive numbers which are not as ambiguous as things such as the 10 kings, 7 wraths, or woman who fornicated with all of those kings. There is no room for interpretation that this book is saying the majority of all of humanity, living and dead, are to be cast into a lake of fire, where they will experience a second and final death. Again, this is less than 1% of all people ever. This is where we have the strictest guidelines for those who are going to get to heaven, and it depicts Jesus as entirely out of character compared to his other depictions in the Bible. This is a book, mind you, which is still debated in terms of authorship. This revelation of the apocalypse is given to someone by the name of John who wrote the book, and is widely regarded by modern scholars to be an unrelated John who never knew Jesus. On what grounds are we to take this book seriously then? Because some John wrote it down? Even if this were written by John the Apostle. I would hope most of everyone watching this video would realize by now that we require firm evidence for such claims like these. There is really no difference from John, author of the book of Revelation, and John, your close friend, who also claims he saw Jesus one time when he was high. There is no evidence which supports the book of Revelation. It is, ultimately, all claims. We have no reason to assume this is anyone with any authority, and it is important to note that all of this is a vision. Anyone can have a vision, and they are actually quite common, yet prophecy watchers would have you believe that this is a prophecy to take very seriously, without providing any good reason as to why. Likely, it's just because this book happens to be in the Bible, and it follows through with the narrative of a day of judgment coming. In the 4 Gospels, Jesus speaks of how he will come down on a cloud and save those who are deemed worthy to bring into the kingdom of heaven. There's nothing about a specific number, let alone a cap of 144,000, and he even stated that to be worthy, you would only need to believe in him and his sacrifice. There's nothing about being virgins, or even sons of the different Israelite nations. If the rapture were to happen now, the Gospels would have you believe that there should be billions of people saved. Yet, Revelation would have you believing a far worse rapture, where only Israelite Christian virgin men get brought into the kingdom of heaven. Then the rest of us have to stay here and experience the absolute worst of God's wrath. You know, because he loves us so much. I'm always surprised whenever a Christian takes the book of Revelation seriously. There are many more biblical texts which were removed from the Bible, oftentimes for superficial reasons, known as the Apocrypha. But you never really hear about people trying to seek them out to see if they were actually the Word of God. I find that interesting, since very few people tend to question why certain books are included in the Bible and why certain books are not. They're just entirely under the assumption that any book included in your average Bible must be included for a good reason. Sorry to harp on so long about this, but I thought it necessary to thoroughly examine the book of Revelation as potential prophecy to calm everyone's nerves about it. I don't think it holds any credence, especially from a Christian perspective. Believe in it if you wish, but I don't see any convincing reason as to why we should accept this book as canon. If anyone has a good reason to believe in this particular book of the Bible, please let us know in the comments below. Let's now continue with the Alien Gospel video and see what else Stearman and Marzulli have to say.
What's interesting is when you have someone from one of the G8 nations, Paul Hellyer, the former defense minister of the Canadian government, go on the record and state, and in a very non-emotional way, just state emphatically that UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. Now, a modicum of research into the phenomena will show that it is real, it is burgeoning, and not going away.
Okay, let's do a modicum of research then. Paul Hellyer has made several declarations affirming the existence of not only UFOs, but extraterrestrial life as well. In a 2007 interview with Ottawa Citizen, he called out for government officials to release the information they had on alien contact in order to transition us away from fossil fuels and into greener fuel alternatives offered by alien technology. What I find rather interesting about this plea of his is that it implies that he himself has no evidence for such communications, only hearsay testimony. Let's do a bit more than a modicum of research then. If we search Paul Hellyer on YouTube, we can find a channel which has him delving into the many books that he has written. What we're particularly interested in is his video on his final book, Hope Restored. This is the self-admitted end of a trilogy of books he has written, and includes condensed versions of previous arguments of his, according to the introduction. This introduction also has all of the hallmarks of conspiratorial fanaticism, including aliens, Nazis, Christianity, and globalism, all of which have fairly shaky evidence at best, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt. For our purposes, however, we are going to rely solely on the video representing his book. While a very large portion of his book is freely available, it does not include the relevant chapters that we're looking for. Additionally, I personally don't really want to pay the $18 required to obtain the book, especially since one review notes that there is very limited information regarding his conviction on extraterrestrials. So, for all intents and purposes, we'll still rely on his own words to hear what it is that he has to say.
At about the same time, Pierre sent me a book. It was titled The Day After Roswell by Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, retired, United States Army. I thought it would make good summer reading. But when I looked for it in the summer of 2004, I couldn't find it. So I had to settle for The Life of Pi instead. It was difficult to know until near the end of it whether it was fact or fiction. In 2005, I was looking for another book that I couldn't find, but there, staring me in the face, was The Day After Roswell. I was about 2/3 of the way through the book and had already concluded that, unlike The Life of Pi, it was based on fact, not fiction, because I recognized the names of some of the generals and many of the air bases that I knew when I was Minister of National Defense.
Interestingly, what Hellyer here admits is that he wasn't actually privy to alien encounters during his tenure as Canadian Minister of National Defense. Rather, long after he held the position, he read the book The Day After Roswell and believed it to be true because it uses real names and real locations. I know. I'm about to pull up some Wikipedia blurbs, but they are mostly for brevity, because they detail essentially what the core problems are with this book that had Hellyer so convinced. Not only did they make many claims without supporting evidence, but other ufologists take issue with the book, believing it to be a book written to convince the general public to further dismiss claims about UFOs. Of course, we could also provide the general objection that most skeptics would make when provided with outlandish stories which contain real people and locations. For instance, Barack Obama appears within the DC universe multiple times, but we know these are fantastical stories that didn't really happen. As much as people may want to believe that Gorilla Grodd went back in time to attempt to assassinate Barack Obama, it simply didn't happen. Claims made within the book by its author, Philip J. Corso, could perhaps be seen as substantial, if true. Claims of how alien contact from the Roswell incident led us to developing technologies that came to prominence in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, such as particle beams, fiber optics, Kevlar, lasers, and computer circuits. This would indeed be substantial, if it were actually true. But a modicum of research into these technologies would clearly show that these were being worked on for decades prior to the Roswell crash. I am honestly rather disgusted by the claim that humans needed aid to figure these things out, because it downplays the actual history of scientific achievement made by real humans. Stephanie Kwolek was the chemist who was behind the invention of Kevlar in 1971. Computer chips had been in development from the early 1900s but found prominence in the late 1950s, after decades of progress in the field of developing integrated circuits. Optical fiber was first theorized in the late 1800s, and through decades of research and development made into a reality in the early 1900s, before Roswell. Clarence Hansel developed a patent for fiber optics which was used by physician Heinrich Lamb in 1930 to create an endoscope. The image quality was poor, but he had developed this technology independently from Hansel, showing that it was certainly within reach for two separate people to develop such technology. It was rudimentary, though, and again, after decades of research, the technology came to prominence in the 1950s and 60s. Lasers and particle beams are also directly influenced by scientific research throughout the early 1900s and into the present day. Einstein was the first to posit the notion of lasers, and with much of the scientific community and an intense battle throughout the 1930s and 40s to be the first to develop atomic weapons, it was only natural for us to discover things such as lasers and particle beams shortly thereafter. You see, the belief that aliens have advanced this technology for us is akin to the belief that aliens clearly must have aided the ancient Egyptians or the ancient Maya or Aztec peoples in building their temples. You know, because those ancient people couldn't wrap their heads around stacking bricks together. I know that's being a tad dismissive of what fans of ancient aliens actually believe. Their actual thought process is that the technology required to build such temples was quite advanced. For example, the Egyptians had to develop methods to transport large slabs of basalt, which still confounded many people up to this day. But, of course, the Egyptians figured it out. The assumption is that ancient people couldn't have figured this out since it took us so long to figure it out ourselves. But this conclusion fails to consider that the pyramids were built over many decades, requiring thousands of people to construct the final project. Yes, while the pyramids align with the stars, I don't really think it's wild to imagine that they took great care to try to align them, since even the prophecy watchers like to fill their time with looking out into space. It's kind of like one of the most common things human beings have done for our entire existence. So, Paul Hellyer has reached his conclusion based off of hearsay evidence without actually doing a modicum of research himself to see the veracity of the claims. He simply just believed it. This is coming from a man who also openly admitted that he read The Life of Pi just prior to his reading of The Day After Roswell, but had difficulty telling if it was fact or fiction. A book which would have been found in a fiction section of a bookstore or library. Even if this book was gifted, it's an allegorical story where the titular Pi is shipwrecked with a tiger and lost at sea yet miraculously survives. The ultimate point being that once he recovers where he lands in Mexico, officials don't believe the story of him surviving alongside a hungry tiger at sea. Pi offers a more believable version of events, replacing the tiger and several other animals also aboard his initial lifeboat with human passengers who are unaccounted for. The officials then must decide which version of the story they prefer to believe, and they choose the story with the animals. I do agree that The Life of Pi is a good book, but the allegory is one about religious belief where the author posits it is preferable to believe in God as opposed to not. It's a message that I don't think is exactly agreeable ultimately, and the book doesn't make a very convincing case either, despite being well written. I can appreciate the irony of the situation here, though. I am on the opposing side of believing things based solely on faith without good evidence, while Hellyer and the Prophecy Watchers would agree with the conclusion of The Life of Pi. I think I would be remiss to not take this opportunity, then, to explain my viewpoint a bit more here. Personally, I don't see a good reason to believe in things with little to no evidence and rely entirely on faith. The reason for this is because there is no position that you cannot take on faith. Why is racism bad? Because some people have faith in it. Why is racism okay? Because some people have faith in it. You can take either side of any argument using faith, so it isn't a reliable means to find any truth. This is, of course, why we should rely upon evidence instead. Additionally, even if we were only to say that faith should remain exclusively in the realm of religious or spiritual claims, I still take issue with that. At this point, any religion is now justified by means of faith. Religions oftentimes come with their own sets of morality, which will influence not only how you view the world, but how you believe we should interact with it and each other. Religion will influence your views on bodily autonomy, your views on the death penalty, punishments for crimes such as stealing. Most important, though, is that it lowers people's epistemological standards. People like Paul Hellyer, being of religious faith, are more likely to be conspiracy theorists because faith has made them susceptible to those who make astronomical claims with little evidence. This has real-world ramifications even outside of political issues. Some religions deny modern medicine and result in many people dying or suffering because of their religious beliefs. These beliefs may also encourage them to try and make others suffer and die, such as their children, due to claims they believe with little to no evidence. I am a skeptic, of course, but I don't live an unhappy life. I still find enjoyment in appreciating the beauty of nature. I like to watch the changing of the seasons and find there to be a romantic quality to sunsets and viewing leaves and grass roll in the wind. I love my partner devoutly. I oppose people who would wish to do harm to others. I love our planet and I love us, human beings. I appreciate life. I don't see why being skeptical and only believing things on adequate evidence would somehow change any of that. There is, of course, the issue of what happens to us after we die. I have found peace with the fact that I don't know. I can say, for what it is worth, it seems as though we would just stop consciously existing. However, everything that makes up our bodies has existed since the beginning of time. Who is to say that it isn't possible that the matter which makes up our bodies will not someday be a part of another life? This is why I believe it is a good use of our bodies, once we die, to be organ donors or be used for medical research. Then, ideally, we would be composted. I know, a radical change to what we normally allow, but it would serve a noble purpose of facilitating new life rather than just rotting in a cemetery or being ashes in a vase. Ultimately, though, it won't matter much to me what happens with my body when I go. I won't have the mental capacity to really care anymore, but it's nice to think that there could potentially be some good done with it. Outside of that, my epistemological standards have me taking positions which I think are more beneficial to life than religious positions would have. I am opposed to genocide and I find it inexcusable. I am opposed to slavery and also find it inexcusable. This is because I am a humanist and think that harm reduction is the best possible method for building a desirable future, rather than destroying the planet for selfish reasons and holding out hope that someday a man in the sky would come down and wipe the whole thing out to give us a clean slate. That was a bit of a long-winded rant, but again, I find it important to make it known that skepticism isn't exactly a bad thing. As for Paul Hellyer being a reliable witness to provide testimony on extraterrestrials, I think we have made it fairly clear that he is not. To further solidify this, though, let's examine Hellyer's testimony about how he went about verifying if the story in The Day After Roswell was true. Did he contact the author of the book to verify his sources? No, he did not. Well, did he independently fact-check the claims made in the book, as I have done in my research of how we developed the alleged alien technology? Also no. Instead, his nephew, who spoke with a retired United States Air Force general, stated that this general confirmed the story from the book. Was this general connected to the book? No, he was not. But let's hear Hellyer out. How did he confirm what his nephew said was true?
About that time, my nephew Philip came along and asked me what I was reading. When I told him, he said, "Well, I'm a skeptic." The next day, I think it was, and later he phoned me and said, "When I told the general you were reading The Day After Roswell," he said, "every word is true and more." The general was a retired United States Air Force officer that Philip had met when they were both working in the aviation industry, and who I had met casually on one occasion. I didn't doubt Philip's report, but it was nevertheless second-hand. So I asked him to give me the general's telephone number and a heads up that I would be calling. When I dialed and the general answered, he didn't even give me time to say, "Hello, how are you?" His very first words were, "Every word is true and more." The exact same response he had given to Philip. The general then spent 20 minutes, to the extent that he was comfortable, with his oath of office, explaining the more. This included the fact that there had been direct face-to-face meetings between United States officials and visitors from other star systems. With this 100% confirmation, I phoned Byrd and Vigiani and told them I would speak at their conference.
So, to clarify, Hellier's research into the subject matter was to call someone else who affirmed the account in Corso's book, and then some, all without providing any evidence aside from testimonial, also known as the most unreliable form of evidence. I don't exactly know if this should be convincing, especially when, again, a modicum of research into Corso's book suggests that it is not true.
The U.S. Council on Foreign Relations wasn't the only group that was thinking ahead. Once the Soviets and Americans had joined the Allied cause, it wasn't long before ultimate defeat seemed inevitable. So key Nazis began to make an alternative plan. They established a base in Antarctica and sent many of their best scientists and engineers, along with all of the necessary support personnel, to a new alternative headquarters that they called the New Berlin. So when the war in Europe ended in June 1945, the German Nazis didn't really give up. They just surrendered and went underground to regroup and start on the long road back to military supremacy.
This is a claim based off of expeditions some Nazis from Germany had made to Antarctica prior to the end of World War II. You'll notice that many other countries similarly made such expeditions as well, which is rather interesting. You may notice these expeditions stopped around 1959, which is when the Antarctic Treaty was signed, making the continent of Antarctica one which is solely used for scientific research. Germany installed 2 research stations in Antarctica after this, one which they eventually gave to South Africa in 2009, and a second which was built that same year. There are no records which indicate either are used by Nazis to bring about a Fourth Reich. Rather, the mere existence of German research stations is the only evidence we are provided with to suggest such a thing. In lieu of evidence, we only are given the tried and true conspiracy theorist reply, the notion that it's all a big cover-up. Now let me ask you, if Nazis had a research station to build a Fourth Reich in Antarctica, which would directly oppose the treaty they had joined, what purpose would all of the other countries have to keep this secret? Would this not be a matter which would result in swift retaliation by other members of this treaty? How would a bunch of old, retired men who have no connections to Antarctica or science know about secret Nazis being there, but no government has figured it out and revealed this? This is ultimately a baseless claim, without any convincing supporting evidence, and as such, it should be carelessly discarded.
It would be interesting to know whose idea it was to move the primary location for back engineering spacecraft to Nevada, in an area designated as Area 51, north of Las Vegas. It appears to have been done without the authority of the Commander-in-Chief, because President Eisenhower wanted to know what was going on out there, and the military refused to tell him. It was only when he threatened to send in the army from Colorado that they capitulated and allowed him to send 3 or 4 of his CIA friends to look around and report back. Their report, as anticipated, was that the principal activity was back engineering the saucer that had crashed near Roswell. While he was president, Eisenhower allegedly signed a document referred to as the Treaty of Grenada, allowing the gray aliens to kidnap a limited number of individuals for examination and genetics material that would permit the creation of a new superior hybrid race. The agreed limits, apparently, were soon ignored, and no one in government has ever reported what has been going on.
According to Britannica, Eisenhower was fully aware of the Area 51 facility, which was initially created to develop the Lockheed U-2 reconnaissance craft. Obviously, being a reconnaissance project, Area 51 was meant to be off the record, and a lot of the original documentation for the creation of this facility was not released until 2002. It is still used to this day and certainly is used for secret projects. However, there is very little evidence, if any at all, that suggests Area 51 is used for alien research. The rest of Hellier's claim here is based on assertions made by conspiracy theorist Michael Salla. We can visit his website, exopolitics.org, and see he has many claims about Eisenhower and his interactions with aliens, none of which have any supporting evidence. There is an alleged leaked DIA document which can be found on thekingdomofnye.com, which tries to claim several appearances of aliens and documents some of the contact made with them. I think it should come as no surprise that this document has tenuous authenticity, but it was somehow sent over to talk show host Heather Ward. I have found no evidence to suggest this document she leaked came from any reliable source, as it is easily located on her website without much fanfare declaring its authenticity. I would imagine that such a document would be purged from her website by the DIA if it were authentic, and after the publishing of this video, perhaps it will be. But it is important to remember that this could be of her own volition to make it appear as though the DIA have purged it. Regardless, I took a few screenshots of pages of this document, and am sharing them now for your perusal. I only took screenshots of pages I found particularly interesting, but according to author Paul Blake Smith, he has a complete version of this document in the back of his book, President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. So, if for some reason all other sources for this allegedly leaked document were to disappear, they should still be found in his book. However, I will note that even the preview of his book doesn't exactly detail where this document comes from. He even fails to acknowledge that it was uploaded by Heather Ward, although it is mentioned by Michael Salla in this YouTube video, which features Paul Blake Smith. Now, if you've paused to read those select pages, you may find the information provided rather unscrupulous, as do I, especially the conversation between an interviewer and a purported alien being who was located at the site of a saucer crash in New Mexico. I find this interesting as there is no mention that this was a crash landing which would have resulted in deaths among the aliens, as according to the hoax of this crash, there would have been 16 bodies recovered. It's interesting that the alien tries to play it off as if this were some intentional visit, with that being the case. The alien being interviewed also offers up contradictory claims, repeatedly trying to state they do not interfere with human beings while simultaneously repeatedly detailing moments where they had, in fact, interfered with human beings on several occasions hundreds of years prior. Not to mention that the conversation being had at that moment is, indeed, interference with human beings. This is a bit of a tangent, but this is my extensive research in trying to find the place where Michael Salla presents any evidence to show that Eisenhower signed a treaty with aliens as claimed by Hellier. There is no evidence. However, Eisenhower's granddaughter did make an appearance on Michael Salla's YouTube page where she denies his involvement with signing anything.
You know, and there's a chance that he did attend one of the meetings. But what Elena says is that even if he attended one of the meetings, he didn't sign a treaty. MJ-12 signed the treaty. Even Alex Collier talks about the moon unit of the NSA responsible for the treaty.
Now, we can spend all day assessing more of what Paul Hellier says in his video, and I may come back to this topic at some later time, but as it stands for the time being, I think we've derailed this video long enough from the topic at hand, which is the Prophecy Watchers. While Marzulli holds Hellier as an official authentic resource on the subject of extraterrestrials, I hope I haven't wasted the past 10 minutes or so and firmly established that he is a fairly unreliable resource. His standards of evidence and research methodology aren't exactly thorough and, if anything, point to how his research is primarily devoted to affirming what he already wants to believe. This quite honestly reminds me a great deal of the Prophecy Watchers, as it seems they, too, have quite similar standards. It comes as no surprise that they would see Paul Hellyer as someone who is quite reliable then. Returning back to their Alien Gospel video, let's see what else Gary Stearman and L.A. Marzulli have to say.
The interpretation of the Bible has been a supernatural, shall we say, to coin a word. Let's push the supernatural back because it's too confusing. It
Scares people.
It scares people.
I don't really see what the issue is with trying to reach reasonable conclusions about unreasonable things as depicted in the Bible. For instance, anthropology, geology, and archaeology all disprove the story of Moses and the Exodus. The same goes for the flood as depicted in Noah's Ark. These events evidently did not happen. So what are the explanations for these stories? Well, these stories are from poetic oral traditions, which were passed on through Jewish-Israeli history. A lot of these stories, which would be found in the New Testament in the Bible, are rather flimsy on whether or not they were meant to be taken literally. There isn't exactly a methodology for confirming which stories are meant to be taken as true and which ones were allegory, but I think we could at least find it agreeable that for a modern context, we should treat the stories that are evidently false as allegory, despite the fact that they might have originally intended to be seen as true. We know that they're not true, and the only external evidence we have to verify these stories does the exact opposite. This produces an issue for the Bible, though. We know that it is not inerrant now. It contains stories which are at least presented as true, but with modern scholarly research we have found them to be false. I think this should cause everyone to more closely examine the claims made by the Bible and recognize that it could also be presenting a false narrative in other areas which we have no reliable evidence to disprove. I encourage everyone to look at the Bible critically in this way and examine why we should believe any of its claims. On what evidence are we to take many of these stories? As for interpreting the Bible or interpreting prophecy, I still don't exactly see why we should lend the Bible any credence when it does not align with reality. Really think for a moment, how many things do you give the benefit of the doubt in that same way? There are thousands of other religions with similar claims of varying authenticity, and especially with varying degrees of realism. When other religions make such claims, do you accept the claim and then try to prove or disprove it, or do you simply not draw a conclusion until you have been presented with sufficient evidence to believe in it? Now, I can already imagine some people would question my epistemology here. I, of course, follow the latter path, where I don't draw a conclusion on a claim until I am provided with sufficient evidence to warrant belief. However, some of you may have clued in that I am, in fact, an atheist. So doesn't that mean that I don't believe in a God? There isn't exactly proof against it. To keep this brief, I will confirm that yes, I cannot disprove the existence of a God. However, if a God were to exist, I don't think it would be the God of the Bible, as there is no evidence for the majority of its claims. And where there is evidence, it acts against the Bible. Let me ask you this, though. If someone insisted unicorns or leprechauns were real, would you say that they don't exist, or would you say that you don't have enough evidence to suggest one way or the other? Well, yes, we do have evidence that these are fantastical creatures, and that may be grounds for denying the existence of such beings. This is also the case for God. Someone could counter by saying that, while these creatures are mythical, they may have existed, and were so endangered no fossil records were left behind. Similarly, they could exist somewhere within our universe. Have you visited every planet where these beings could potentially exist? Of course not. So why would you say they don't exist? This is where we reach my conclusion. I don't find it productive to waste our mental energy saying things might exist when there is no good evidence for them. As such, until such evidence is provided, we should go about our lives as if those things don't exist, since they are not readily evident. For all intents and purposes, then, we could say they don't exist until we have reason to change our stance to acknowledge their existence is true, or there is evidence to suggest a reasonable probability that they are real. Returning to what Gary Stearman has said, I would like to refer back to our previous discussions involving the prophecies our hosts are watching out for. When I examined them, I tried to consider the time period in which these prophecies were written, and even tried to take them somewhat at face value. When we did this, we reached reasonable conclusions that these were prophecies for their times, and were often motivated by contemporary issues. Joel was concerned about Israel's enemies to the south. Daniel was concerned about Israel's northern Grecian army, specifically Antiochus, and the book of Revelation was just trying to claim what the as-of-yet non-disclosed rapture and apocalypse were going to look like, and was written by an author who we know very little about, and, from what we do know, he doesn't really have much authority regarding that matter. I think these are reasonable takeaways from those prophetic stories, but I do suppose we are all entitled to come to our own conclusions. I just hope that I have made a strong enough case for my conclusions to at least get you to consider them, or to try your own hand at figuring out what you think those passages could have possibly meant, given the times they were written. Now let's return to Marzulli.
Alien Agenda 1 and Alien Agenda 2. Let's talk about that. What would the alien agenda be? We've laid the groundwork up to now.
And that was an interesting conversation, three-way between Tom Horn, yourself, and myself.
That's right.
And we were discussing the end time scenario with the so-called extraterrestrial presence, which of course all three of us believe that this is the presence of the fallen angelic host masquerading as ET. These are highly intelligent but malevolent interdimensional beings, not extraterrestrial beings, interdimensional beings, who, when they appear, will tell us that, one, this falls right in with the whole Darwinian paradigm and what we talked about a little earlier, Dawkins is promulgating. One, they will tell us that they created all life on this planet, that they seeded it here. Two, that they manipulated early man. Three, that they started the world's earliest civilizations, religions, and now, at this critical juncture in human history, probably after some sort of cataclysmic event like a nuclear exchange someplace, we, ET, are back with not only knowledge, but a DNA upgrade for humanity. And all you need to do is take this little chip, which will just implant, you won't even feel a thing, and you will live maybe 500 years, maybe longer, disease-free.
Once again, Marzulli seems to be mistaken about what Richard Dawkins actually believes regarding intelligent design. His position, as I am currently aware, remains to be inconclusive. He only offered up the idea of extraterrestrial visitors planting life here on Earth as a reasonable explanation for how intelligent design may be correct. He does not, however, subscribe to this belief. Even if he did, there is no evidence for such a claim. Speaking of no evidence for claims being made, this is what Marzulli is once again doing when he predicts extraterrestrials will fulfill biblical prophecy. We have already addressed how Daniel's prophecy was meant to happen around the time when the book was written, and I still think a case has not yet been made for us to take this prophecy as true. It is, in essence, simply because it is in the Bible, and has not happened yet. I don't find this to even be the least bit convincing. Marzulli takes this already unscrupulous prophecy and further muddies it by introducing alien conspiracy theories. All of this is running off of pure fantasy, by all appearances, since we have yet to receive even an argument for why these things are true, let alone supporting evidence. The past 17 minutes of this Prophecy Watchers video has essentially just been asserted claim after asserted claim. I would like to offer up a challenge here to Marzulli considering this. It's rather simple, but I would like for him to provide a deadline for when he believes any of what he is saying is prophesized to happen should transpire. It could be within the next 10 years, or it could even be within the next 10,000 years. I think we could all agree, though, that the longer period of time he provides, the less credence we should offer any of his pet theories. I too could claim that the world is going to end soon without any reasonable evidence, but if my deadline is just whenever the world ends, or something as far off as 10,000 years, I would hope that anyone who would even take the time to hear me out would realize that I am, in essence, talking out of my own butt, so to speak.
Stanley Kubrick, remember 2001,
Sure.
A Space Odyssey?
I remember it being 2001 as opposed to 2001, but let's hear him out.
Where an astronaut goes out into outer space because an artifact is discovered on the surface of the moon, suggesting that man's progenitors left a sign there, and that sign should be followed into outer space so that man could seek his origins. That was back in the early 60s, folks, and that was a propaganda piece.
Absolutely.
As far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
And we've seen the outgrowth of that. This changed the way people are thinking.
No, it has. And then from that, you get the movie Prometheus several years ago, which basically touched on exactly the same idea that, and I mentioned that this man, and a man goes out looking for his creator, looking for his progenitor. And Prometheus, the movie, that's what it's promulgating.
Yeah.
And this all hinges on Darwinism. What it does is it steers the viewer away from the biblical narrative and points out there to the source of life on planet Earth.
I would recommend that Marzulli check out the previous sources I mentioned as an introduction to evolutionary biology. He seems to have a fundamental misunderstanding of what Darwinian evolution is. I think his frequent usage of the term Darwinism is a bit of a tell here. This is commonly used by creationist detractors of evolutionary biology who like to pretend that science is a religious belief, which requires faith, because it would make it seem as though religion and science are then on the same footing when they are obviously not. I will still use the term for the time being, as it can be used neutrally to describe elements of evolutionary theory that were unique to Darwin. Specifically, Darwinism posited the notion of natural selection. Natural selection is not a conscious effort by nature to make anything turn into something else. It is essentially external factors, which are relatively beyond any given organism's control, which applies a sort of selection pressure against them. As a rudimentary example, if we took penguins and ostriches and put them both on the North Pole, penguins would be far more likely to survive for several generations because they are better suited for that environment. This is a very basic example and somewhat undersells what Darwinism is actually saying, but this core concept can be applied to anywhere on our planet. The animals who are most suited to survive in any given environment are going to pass on their lineage for multiple generations. Eventually, through hundreds, thousands, or even millions of generations, these creatures are going to drastically change to be even better fit for their given environments, as the environments themselves will also change. There are many real-world examples of this, human beings ourselves being one of them. If you took a human being from 1,000 years ago and compared them to a human being now, there would be noticeable difference in things such as their height, weight, life expectancy, and physiology. However, these differences would seem slight, for the most part, because they are. The further back we go in human history, though, these changes are going to appear far more drastic, reaching a point where we may even consider early humans to be an entirely different species from us, despite the fact that we have descended from them. These movies being referenced by prophecy watchers do not hinge on Darwinism, or even evolution. They are fantastical narratives. Nothing in our modern understanding of evolution even hints at the idea of early humans being introduced to Earth by an external force, nor does it imply an external force seeding all life on Earth at some point. Especially not 2001: A Space Odyssey, which completely disregards the theory of evolution for science fiction, suggesting human evolution was spurred on by alien technology. Arthur C. Clarke's novelization provides further elaboration for the monoliths, stating that they were left by a highly advanced civilization to help expedite evolution of lesser species throughout the entire galaxy. It brings early humans into the Stone Age and later brings the protagonist, Dave Bowman, into an even further heightened stage of evolution, becoming a star child. This is all allegorical and remains in the realm of science fiction. I would hope that many people would be able to differentiate the worlds of fantasy and reality, but I also cannot doubt the powerful effects that allegory can have on our thoughts. We certainly can be convinced of an argument that is provided through a story, but I still feel that the argument being posited by a work must be convincing. Propaganda pieces, or any allegorical story for that matter, should be capable of being countered by another argument. This is not what Marzulli offers. Instead, he points to the Bible as a better source of information, but without providing any tangible evidence for why we should. I understand this video only has 30 minutes of runtime, and he only has so much time to talk, but there have been several occasions where he was afforded the opportunity to present any evidence. He instead defers to the authority of the Bible and to other ufologists. While I don't necessarily think it is a bad thing to refer to experts or valid sources, I've done so myself several times this video. However, I feel as though we have already demonstrated that his resources thus far are particularly lacking in credibility. As it stands, he still would need to provide sufficient evidence that is concordant with the claims that he is making.
And when we think about the complex, the Bible tells us very simply that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And when we look at the complexity of the human being and how all these systems work independently of each other, just one system, we look at the circulatory system and the miracle of the heart. How does the heart develop by itself? I mean, and show me one transitory animal. They always show this sort of a chimpanzee walking almost upright, and then poof, he's there. I mean, it's the biggest bunch of horsebucky. There is no transitory animal. Man is there, and they, no matter what they find, one tooth. Well, it must look like this, and they draw some ape man or something and try to tell us that this is what we look like. They don't have a clue, and we know. Watson and Crick discovered this. We know from the DNA that the oxyribonucleic acid, the double helix of life, that this is a complex message system which creates everything according to its own kind. Hummingbirds beget hummingbirds, humpback whales beget humpback whales, and men and women produce children who are men, not chimeras, not satires, not anything else. Mm-hmm. Now you can go in there and mess with the DNA, which is what's happening now, the whole transhumanism idea, which is now coming, and who would have imagined that 50 or 60 years ago?
Marzulli refers at one point to the March of Progress, which is an image that depicts the gradual process of humans from our more classically ape-like ancestors to our current state, although it should be noted that we are still apes. This image has been criticized from both sides of the evolutionary divide, though. Creationists hate it for trying to relay the facts of evolution, while some scientists criticize it for grossly oversimplifying the process of evolution, as it almost implies a linear chain of progress, which isn't necessarily the case. As for Marzulli's point about the human heart developing on its own, that is just evidently what had to have happened. We have hearts, this much isn't disputed, but we don't have any evidence to suggest someone put hearts in our bodies. The evolution of organs isn't as easily provable as the evolution of species as a whole. However, there are burgeoning studies into such evolution, and we have reason to believe that of all of our organs, skin was the first to be developed for living organisms. This is important because it would allow for the separation between the insides of our bodies and the outsides of our bodies. Such research is in its infancy, though, as it is still difficult to conduct research of this level. We cannot pull up fossil records to see these gradual changes, so the evolution of our organs is dependent upon educated assumptions as to how they would have developed. While it would be nice for us to observe the gradual development of these organs, this is a very slow, gradual process that likely took many millions of years while leaving the organs themselves behind as evidence. So, because we have organs, we know that at some point we must have grown organs. We may be disappointed with this answer, but it is certainly more plausible than the notion that a magical being beyond our understanding is the one responsible, especially without sufficient evidence to show that such a being exists. Marzulli then asks for us to show him one transitional species. For anyone who is even loosely familiar with the science behind evolution, this is a laughable request. On screen now are just a few screenshots of all of the transitional forms that we have, and it is still not comprehensive. The assertion that we don't have any transitional forms to support evolution has been widely outdated for decades now, and it comes off as naive at best and dishonest at worst. Now, I'm hoping you'll forgive me here for my cheekiness, but one only has to do a modicum of research to see how simply asinine it is to state that we do not have transitional forms. Based on Marzulli's representation of evolution, it is abundantly clear that he does not actually care about understanding evolution or with honestly interacting with the field. He states that there have been instances where we've located an ancient tooth and drawn up a mock sketch of what this early human looked like. While yes, this is a real hoax, it was the evolutionary scientific community who pointed this fact out. Creationists may have been correct about fraudulent findings like the Nebraska Man or the Piltdown Man, but it was not because they have the correct stance on the topic. For example, someone who believed in aliens placing humans here in our current states approximately 4,000 years ago would similarly be correct in their doubt on those two fraudulent finds. However, their reasoning for doubt is ill-founded and not based on any reasonable skepticism, but rather belief in what could perhaps be described as an even more ridiculous position.
There's a Christian watching this right now who's saying, oh, no, LA, you've gone too far. What would you say to that individual?
I would say do your homework. If I've gone too far, you do the homework. You go out there and do a modicum of research, and anyone will see that the phenomena is real. People are being taken. There are people at conferences, there may be people in your church who have been abducted and are too ashamed to talk about it because of what happens. If you're a female, eggs are taken. If you're a male, sperm is taken. Sometimes you're forced to have sex with a hybrid being. We actually have a hair, which we talked about in our Watches series, talk about it in Non-Betrayal Volume 2, which was incredible. We had Raman spectroscopy done from a hair from an alien, what we believe is a hybrid being. It was almost white and transparent. And we took a red hair from one of the skulls from Paracas, and we put them under Raman spectroscopy. We had two control samples, a dyed human hair and a normal human hair. The dyed human hair went like this on the graph. The human hair went like this. Well, the hybrid hair, okay, and the red hair from Paracas went like this. The slopes mimicked each other. They were mirror image of each other throughout the graph.
Both of non-human.
Non-human, that's what we believe it is.
Stock.
That's what we believe it is.
And so there is a, if you will, breeding program going on.
There's a breeding program, and the Bible tells us that.
Indeed. I hope the spectroscopic study was peer-reviewed and well documented, and it would be nice to see the results. As far as I can tell, they are not available anywhere. All we have is the testimony of Marzulli that this testing was done, and even then we don't know where the testing was performed, by whom, and what the qualifications are for those involved. I also feel it worth pointing out that all that Raman spectroscopy does is analyze whether or not colorants were used in samples of hair. I don't think it's a very impressive claim at all to say that non-human hair has been found and they proved that it wasn't colored. That's great. I'm glad we confirmed that there was no human intervention to alter the color of that strand of hair. What is more important, though, is proof that this hair is not of any life form that can be found on the planet. If those hair samples were still to exist, it would be more useful to have a histological analysis of the hair performed by professionals that comprehensively compare it to common life forms on Earth. Preferably, this would be posted in a scientific study. However, I would still settle for a write-up that at least resembles a professional scientific journal or article, showing that those who analyze this hair sample are familiar enough with the field to at least get that information correct. I presume that this is an impossible ask, though. I think Marzulli and his unnamed team of researchers would hesitate to at all get close to the realm of science. This isn't because there is a conspiracy working against them trying to silence the truth, but rather because these alien claims don't have much truth to begin with. In saying all of that, we have now essentially touched upon the major parts of the Bible which the prophecy watchers like to regularly look at, as well as closely examine their claims about alien interference with humans. I may address them in their content again, but I would like to conclude this current video by reminding everyone that we have only looked at 2 of their videos thus far. A drop in the bucket for all intents and purposes. However, I feel it worth stating that these 2 videos are from nearly a decade ago at the time of this video's upload. This is 10 years of insisting that the end of the world would be any day now. As I mentioned earlier, they are looking for signs which are quite common based off of prophecies which I feel they haven't properly examined and have yet to demonstrate reason to believe in. So, in closing, I would like to provide a bit of a prophecy of my own. An angelic figure wrapped with linens had given it to me, you see. This prophecy that was shown to me revealed that the prophecy watchers will continue looking for signs in the stars where there are none, using fear-mongering and conspiratorial thinking to continue taking advantage of the fears people have about the rapture, and selling them books, DVDs, magazines, and merchandise, because they are one of the few organizations out there trying to spread the word about when the day of judgment will finally arrive. A day which, ultimately, will never come. They will, however, make a fairly good amount of money in the meantime. Let me know what you think of my prophecy. It could very well come true, or perhaps I could be wrong. Only time will tell, I suppose.
I mean, a modicum of research. Now, a modicum of research and do a modicum of research and
Wow.